Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Black Collective podcast as part of the Reach Network here at Ipsos UK. My name is Barbara and I'm your host for today. Our discussion is going to be on the diaspora and cultural disconnect. But before we get into our topic for today, we're just going to have some introductions. My name is Barbara. Here at Ipsos, I am a graduate research executive in customer experience service line. I was born and bred in Zimbabwe, and I moved to the UK about 20 years ago. Okay, so who wants to go next? Deqa.
Hello, my name is Deqa, and I am a semiotics consultant in our advisory part of the business. I'm ethnically East African all over the place, and I grew up in Denmark and have lived here for just over half my life, so diaspora in every sense of the word.
Hi, I am Anu. I am also in the customer experience service line. Unlike Deqa and Barbara, I have been born and raised in the UK, but I would refer to home as Nigeria.
Hi, I'm Whitney. I'm a research executive in the channel performance team, and I'm part of the client services team. I am born and raised in the UK as well, but ethnically I'm from Kenya.
Cool.
Big up East Africa.
Oh, well, Southern Africa, raising the flag for Southern Africa. And last but not least.
Yeah, so my name's James. I'm a senior research executive in the market strategy and understanding team. And I'm also born and raised in the UK, but my background is from Ghana. So both my parents were born and raised in Ghana.
Right, so we've gone west, we've gone south. Very interesting. And east as well. So yeah, let's kick off the discussion on diaspora. I was interested to learn that this word actually originated from the Greek. I thought it would have maybe like Latin or something or other. And it means to disperse. So it comes from two words, from dia, which means across, and like Sperian, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, which means to scatter. So like the word implies scattering or dispersion across the world, and it implies like wider separation or even complete breakup of a community or a group. Do we identify with those characteristics, or do our families identify with those, do you think?
In regard to the word diaspora, to be fair, I've never given the word too much thought. But in terms of that definition of scatter, that does resonate in very recent times. Because funnily enough, I was literally speaking to my dad about our current family dynamics and comparing how myself and my first cousins, like most of us, to be fair, we're quite scattered. Some of us are in the US, most of us were in the UK and in and around London. But even though we're in the southeast, I was in like Essex, East London, had some cousins in Croydon, some in Maidenhead. And I was basically explaining to him how our relationships, or my sister and my relationships with my cousins, aren't the same as his, because I think he had the benefit of growing up in Ghana with cousins and other family members in their immediate area, probably in like a 5-mile radius. And I think that cultivated stronger bonds. So even though I grew up with my cousins in the sense of I probably saw them a handful of times in the year, I think my parents but they don't understand why my relationship with my cousins aren't as strong as theirs. I think I had that realization, or I was finally able to articulate why. And I think, just the nature of like all of my parents' siblings migrating over, they didn't have the luxury of choosing where, or they had some luxury in choosing where to settle, but obviously, or not obviously, they moved mainly for economic reasons, and so like stayed and settled where near their jobs of choice. So yeah, cultivating those relationships.
Yeah, very interesting.
But yeah, that's just my initial thoughts on it.
Anyone else? Yeah, go on, Whitney.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think seeing this like sort of disbursement of my family again has started with my parents' generation. Most of me and my cousins are first generation in whichever countries our parents decided to settle in. And they all, so obviously all of our parents, like James said, they all grew up together in a community with their immediate family, with their extended family. So I definitely see it when I go back to Kenya with my family and see how close my parents are with, and almost like their siblings with their cousins, because they grew up in an environment together. And then I compare it to sort of me and my cousins, and thanks to social media, speak more often now than probably did when we were younger. But even then, it's still like a sort of a hi and bye a few times a year, Merry Christmas, things like that. And we're not sort of anywhere near as close as when I see my parents with their extended family. And that is very much because when my parents spread out around the world from their siblings, and everyone sort of like in the US, in Canada, in the UK, when everybody's kind of gone into their different directions and begun this new stage of their life, their lives aren't necessarily compatible anymore. And I think it's a lot harder to sort of stay in contact and sort of keep seeing each other, especially when we're not in necessarily a community where the way that our culture works, like in Kenya, is the same. I think in Kenya, you drop in on people a lot more. You're constantly seeing each other, and I think everybody's kind of more living in a communal kind of way. When you compare it to sort of being like for me in the UK, I had cousins I used to live in London. I grew up in London, and they were in London as well, but they might as well have been up in like Scotland or something. It's just you don't tend to see
So
people. You're not as close. Yeah.
Not as close as maybe what you saw in your parents and their siblings and cousins. Yeah, I resonate with that. How about go on, Deqa.
Yeah, similar but slightly different for me. So my mum is one of 14 siblings.
Wow. Oh, my mum is one of 10.
My dad's one of 9. Like it's
my goodness.
Big families.
Yeah. So my mum and her siblings, they're quite close, even though all but 2 are in the diaspora somewhere. So in the Americas, around Europe, different places. So they made it quite a point for us to grow up quite close. And I actually, I remember when I grew up in Denmark, somebody asked me, how many siblings do you have? And I said 24. And then they said, no, that's not true. And I said, yes, it is. And then I had to explain that in my culture, my cousins are my siblings. And
there you go. And sorry to interject there, because actually, in my language, in Zimbabwe, we don't have a word for cousin. It doesn't actually exist in our vocabulary. So it's either brother, sister. And if you want to elaborate to actually say, to make a distinction that this is not your sibling as your sister or your brother, but your cousin, you would say it like, this is my cousin brother. It's not even correct, but I find that interesting. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, it's very similar in my culture, but the thing that weirdly happened, we grew up super close, and that's because the adults were kind of in charge of the relationships, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But as we became older and going to adulthood and live very individualistic lives, everybody's the rat race of life, family, all of those things, only some of us still keep in touch. And actually my cousins in Canada, I would say more than cousins, more than siblings, are like my best friends even. But the ones that live in London, haven't seen them for years. They haven't met my children. And it's not like that it's a bad thing. We just come together at funerals and weddings.
Right.
and so like that disconnect is definitely something I feel more in my adulthood rather than in youth.
Yeah. So do you think it's to do with reasons why people migrate? Do we even know like what stats we have on migration in the UK?
Yeah, I can share some stats. So at the end of June 2022, it was found that net migration stood at 504,000 people. So that was due to 1.1 million people migrating into the UK and then 560,000 people emigrating out of the UK.
Oh,
so net migration was at 504,000. And the this net migration concentrates largely around London. So we have 35% of people who are not born in the UK living in London. So we just see that migration is concentrated largely in London. And the number of people migrating to the UK has continued to increase since 1994. So we see more migration than emigration in the UK.
Wow, that's interesting. Is that this is official statistics from?
Yes, straight from the House of Commons Library.
From the House of Commons.
1.1 million people moved to the UK.
Yeah.
560 moved out, leaving net migration at 504,000 people. So more people are moving to the UK than leaving the UK.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, cool. So, and do we know like why people migrate to wherever, not just to the UK, around the world? What are the main reasons this migration is happening?
I think generally for seeking out new opportunities, new job opportunities. And I think it's not necessarily as in people want to go and, experience a new way of life and things like that. And I know through speaking with my parents and their friends, a lot of them, their main goal is to eventually return back home and kind of have this fantasy of retiring back, once they've kind of come and sort of made money and sort of lived a life abroad, come to the UK and get a really like a solid job, get a career, work through it and send money back when they can to friends and family, to savings so they can. And a lot of the time, I know that my parents will invest their money back in Kenya, and they'll buy more properties, they'll buy more land, and it's all almost like they're setting things up so that when they get to the point of retirement, it's like, okay, great, thanks for having me, I'm gonna head on home now, and go and sort of enjoy all of that hard work that I've put into it, and it's quite interesting to see that and then compare it with my generation of me and my cousins. And I think especially where we've grown up, we're born and raised in other countries, for me, I wouldn't necessarily call Kenya home. I think it's sort of a place where it's really great to go and visit and to go and see family and things like that. But I can't imagine ever going back to live there. And I think, and it makes me sad to think I've often said, you're not allowed to go back to my parents because I'm like, you can't leave me, and I'm not going back. And I think it's an interesting kind of divide. And you do get some people that are, very firmly and no, I really have adjusted. And I know for example, my mum left Kenya when she was about 18. She's lived the majority of her life in the UK. And I think for her, she's never kind of said, I want to move back to Kenya at some point. She kind of, as she gets older, she wants to spend more time there to be closer with family, especially as sort of her mother gets older and things like that. But she's almost kind of made a new home in the UK. And I think it can be hard. Maybe you have the idea that you'll go and just work and then come back. And it can be difficult to try and separate yourself and go back to Kenya again, especially after being away for so many decades. And it's likely that things aren't going to be the same as the way you left it. So there is kind of that split of people that are very firmly no, I'm going to go back home, and they do. And then some people who have that intention, but then they start a new life and it just isn't kind of their destiny to go back again.
And I was just wondering for you three, Anu, James and Whitney, because you mentioned that you were born and bred in the UK to immigrant parents living in the UK. What was it like growing up?
If I look back now, I can see, so I can basically have different views on it based on my environment. So as I mentioned before, I'm still in East London, Essex area, which is pretty diverse and probably, it's had for a while, for as long as I can remember, a high concentration of like diverse cultures, probably a lot of first generation kids who I grew up with. But saying that, I went to school in areas deeper in Essex where that wasn't so much the case. And I think when I look back to when I was in school, I think that's when I probably was becoming cognizant of certain differences in upbringing to my friends.
So if you just paint a picture, like, for example, what sort of differences are you referring to?
Like food eating at home, just certain conventions in terms of going to a friend's house, of like greetings said, and even like my parents were big on this, so we came to the house, they'd have to just like bring them in to introduce my parents.
Right.
Let them know they're in the house, even though they sound like small things. There were just certain things that I would notice when the shoe was on the other foot, and I would go to a friend's house. And at the time they're all pretty innocent, and small things that you may not realize or take too much notice of at the time. I think the older I got, the more I was able to just notice, subtle or sometimes more obvious differences.
Right.
But I wouldn't say it made things particularly hard or difficult at just in a crude way. But just looking back, when I did change schools and went to school, I think closer to home, and I ended up going to a school with more of a higher proportion of Asian kids, so from South Asia, so like Indian, Pakistani, Bengalis in sixth form, even though they weren't from the same background and ethnic groups as myself. I remember just having discussions and speaking about upbringing and noticing quite a lot of similarities, probably somewhat surprisingly and then unsurprisingly.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Just to quickly go back to when you were talking about the definition, and I said home is Nigeria. That was almost like a slip of the tongue, because I know that if I went back to Nigeria, it wouldn't feel like home. It would almost be a culture shock to me anyway. I actually had a friend who went there in December, and she said, whoa, she she didn't anticipate, being shocked that much by how different life is. Even though we're here in the UK, we listen to songs like Afro beats, or we still wear traditional wear, or we still have our communities where speak the same language.
That connection is still there.
We still have that connection, but it's different when you actually live in that country. And I definitely cannot deny that there's a disconnect. But in terms of what was it like being born or growing up with immigrant parents, I think it's just that conflict of primary and secondary socialization. So obviously during primary socialization, your parents are basically bringing you up on food, language, manners,
how to greet,
norms, exactly.
Adults,
and then you go to school and it's completely different. I think where I saw it manifest the most was, I would say, with my name, where nobody could basically say my name.
So how do you say your name properly?
What name? What name do you want me to start with? I have so many.
That's another thing as well.
Yeah. But Anu is a shortened version of Anu Olatunbosun, and some people will get at me for my pronunciation. But that's how you say my name. But in school, it was always an issue. And in school, I wasn't called Anu. I was called so the name. This is the way my name should have been said, Wura Ola. But in school, it was turned to sort everybody's tongue to Warola. And I just grew up thinking, you know, that's the norm. That's the way my name just has to be said so that, you know, can just be accepted and fit into these spaces, until I got to like sixth form. I said, no, this is my name and this is how you say it.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting.
That's interesting
growing up,
because my daughter, her name, full name is Ropafazo, which means blessing. Because no one could pronounce, or very few could pronounce her name properly. When she went off to uni, she decided to like start using her middle name. Her middle name is Robin. It's very difficult sometimes when people can't pronounce your name the way it's supposed to be pronounced. Can I ask you a question, Deqa? This is directed to you. Diaspora has been associated, like especially in its beginnings, with trauma. Like in your work, what is your experience, or do you identify with some of those multiple cultural identities associated with it, boundary maintenance and identity maintenance and things like that, group identity?
The thing with the concept of diaspora is you can't remove it from from trauma, because oftentimes the reason why you're diaspora to begin with is rooted in traumatic experience, whether that's yours or your parents or their parents or whoever it may be. And we also have to remember that not all diaspora are here where their parents unwillingly came here, like with their own 2 feet. There's also slavery from the Caribbean to African Americans, and so it's again irremovable from its trauma. And because of all of these different intersections of blackness in what diaspora is the reason why we have this idea of black culture. I mean, what is black, right? We all should come from different places. You don't, like, whiteness doesn't have like a culture that is shared. There is no whiteness.
Do we see each other the same?
The thing is that there is a shared experience in blackness, right? And it's an imposition. It's how you are viewed. It's never how I view myself. And I resonate with something Anu said earlier about when she said, like, this is who I am. I think I identify with parts of Somalia and parts of Ethiopia because that's my home. That's in my book where I'm from. But when I go there, because I'm so culturally distant, they won't see me as one of them. They can, like, I don't know about you guys as countries, but for me, they can tell a Westerner from their walk.
Straight. Wow.
As in, like, my language is like fantastic. Like I can, when I start speaking my languages, like I sound super native, but they can tell from your characteristics, from your walk, from how you ask things. And it's really deeply ingrained. And so I would say there are certain things that I would probably have more in common with someone from Denmark who's black, or someone from the UK who's black, than I would with somebody down there, even though at its root, that's where I see myself at home. Because again, if I'm just standing around, I'm not other unless I express. Whereas here, just me standing, I'm already other. In Denmark, just standing, I'm already other. So that's why they will never be more home to me than the place that I never lived.
That's very interesting. And does anyone else want to add anything? Maybe stereotypes, common stereotypes that you've been subjected to, or maybe subjected others to. For example, when go on. Go on, sorry.
And I feel like a lot of us will probably relate to this one. Talking white. That's
Please explain to our audience what you mean by that.
So when you are from, I'd probably say London, and I'll just use my London accent as an example. I taught myself it as like through TV. Like I taught myself English through TV when I came to this country. And so I adopted the accents that I was watching, which was a plethora. So often I just become the people I'm speaking to. I don't really have an accent, I think. I just mimic whoever I'm speaking English to. And so if that's someone back home, then it becomes that.
No, it's definitely, I feel like I relate to that a lot. I think something that I'd never really noticed it. I grew up in London, and then For secondary school, I started school in Hertfordshire at a boarding school, and my accent changed drastically, mostly because I had a very like sort of Londoner accent. And not that I would get made fun of, but people used to comment on it and be like, it's not proper English. And so I very quickly like changed to having, I guess, the accent that I have now. And then I think on my friends hadn't really, they'd come to my house and like, you know, visited with my family before, but just kind of me and my immediate family. But for my 18th birthday, I had sort of all of my extended family had a massive party, where all of my parents, friends, and, you know, the aunts and uncles that aren't aunts and uncles, but, you know, that's what we call them. Like everybody was there, and I had my friends from school, and without realizing it, my accent would become I guess more of a like a Kenyan twang to it, I guess. And that's something that I'd never noticed that I do. But when I'm with my family, I almost try to not that they won't understand me, but I feel like my voice stands out a lot if I continue with this accent, and I feel like I don't fit in as well. Like it's not something that is like actually real, it's something that's in my mind. But I find that my accent tends to become a stronger Kenyan accent when I'm talking to people from Kenya or when I'm with my family, and I pronounce words differently. And it's not, I was kind of always aware of it, but I wasn't aware of how like strong and how like in a flash that I can do it. And it wasn't until I had my friends around and I was talking to my aunt, like one second I was talking to my friends and I turned around and said something to my aunt, and I looked back and all my friends were looking at me like I'd grown another head or something. Like they were just like, what? And they were like, we've never seen this side of you before. We've never heard you speak like that. And and it wasn't like it was more like they were just so shocked, and they were like, this is incredible. We've never seen you outside of just, you know, the way that we see you at school and the way that we see you when we're together. And I think that's like something as so small as just like your voice, but it makes a big difference. And that's something that I've realized is that I do tend to like adapt my voice to whoever I'm speaking to. And even just like talking to my mum, like one or two words will come out in not this accent, but with like a slightly accented way. And even though I was born and raised in the UK, I don't speak Swahili like you would think, like, why does that happen? But it's just because, you know, when I start speaking to them, I feel like I need to code switch, I think is what they call it. I need to do that to kind of fit in more with them, and feel more part of the community than if I go in with my Queen's English like accent and kind of people looking at me like this is like a really strange thing to hear.
That's very interesting. Sorry, Anu, you were about to say something?
No, I was just gonna agree with what Whitney was saying. It's almost like camouflaging when you enter all these different spaces.
So the whole idea of having or assuming multiple identities really comes through when you are like trying to fit in terms of having conversations with your family as opposed to having conversations with your colleagues or in different settings. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?
Absolutely. And it's all rooted in belonging and wanting to belong, because you don't want to stick out like a sore thumb in any kind of space. And I definitely do that as well, code switching around my family. I drop P's because in my language we don't have the sound of P, so I lose the P around family.
Right. Thank you guys so much. It's been an interesting discussion. To our listeners, thank you for tuning in. If you have any questions or any discussion points, topics that you would like us to explore, please reach out to us with suggestions at uk-reach-the-black collective@ipsos.com. So yeah, see you at the next podcast.